It will be observed that under this confederation, each state had the right to decide for itself and in its own tribunals whom it would acknowledge as a free inhabitant of another state. The term free inhabitant, in the generality of its terms, would certainly include one of the African race who had been manumitted. But no example, we think, can be found of his admission to all the privileges of citizenship in any state of the Union, after these articles were formed, and while they continued in force. And, notwithstanding the generality of the words free inhabitants, it is very clear that, according to their accepted meaning, in that day, they did not include the African race, whether free or not, for the 5th section of the 9th article provides that Congress should have the power to agree upon the number of land forces to be raised, and to make requisitions from each state for its quota in proportion to the number of white inhabitants in such state, which requisitions should be binding. Words could hardly have been used which more strongly mark the line of distinction between the citizen and the subject, the free and the subjugated races. The latter were not even counted when the inhabitants of a state were to be embodied in proportion to its numbers for the general defense. And it cannot for a moment be supposed that a class of persons thus separated and rejected from those who formed the sovereignty of the states were yet intended to be included under the words free inhabitants in the preceding article, to whom privileges and immunities were so carefully secured in every state. But although this clause of the Articles of Confederation is the same in principle with that inserted in the Constitution, yet the comprehensive word inhabitant, which might be construed to include an emancipated slave, is omitted, and the privileges confined to citizens of the state. And this alteration in words would hardly have been made unless a different meaning was intended to be conveyed, or a possible doubt removed. The just and fair inference is that as this privilege was about to be placed under the protection of the general government, and the words expounded by its tribunals, and all power in relation to it taken from the state and its courts, it was deemed prudent to describe with precision and caution the persons to whom this high privilege was given, and the worn citizen was on that account substituted for the words free inhabitant. The word citizen excluded, and no doubt intended to exclude, foreigners who had not become citizens of some one of the states when the Constitution was adopted, and also every description of persons who were not fully recognized as citizens in the several states. This, upon any fair construction of the instruments to which we have referred, was evidently the object and purpose of this change of words. To all this mass of proof we have still to add that Congress has repeatedly legislated upon the same construction of the Constitution that we have given. 3 laws, 2 of which were passed almost immediately after the government went into operation, will be abundantly sufficient to show this. The 2 first are particularly worthy of notice, because many of the men who assisted in framing the Constitution and took an active part in procuring its adoption were then in the halls of legislation, and certainly understood what they meant when they used the words people of the United States and citizen in that well-considered instrument. The first of these acts is the Naturalization Law, which was passed at the second session of the First Congress, March 26, 1790, and confines the right of becoming citizens to aliens being free white persons. Now, the Constitution does not limit the power of confess in this respect to white persons, and they may, if they think proper, authorize the naturalization of anyone of any color who was born trade or allegiance to another government. But the language of the law, above quoted, shows that citizenship at that time was perfectly understood to be confined to the white race, and that they alone constituted the sovereignty and the government. Congress might, as we before said, have authorized the naturalization of Indians, because they were aliens and foreigners. But, in their then untutored and savage state, no one would have thought of admitting them as citizens in a civilized community. And, moreover, the atrocities they had but recently committed, when they were the allies of Great Britain in the Revolutionary War, were yet fresh in the recollection of the people of the United States, and they were even then guarding themselves against the threatened renewal of Indian hostilities. No one supposed then that any Indian would ask for, or was capable of enjoying the privileges of an American citizen, and the word white was not used with any particular reference to them. Neither was it used with any reference to the African race imported into or born in this country, because Congress had no power to naturalize them, and therefore there was no necessity for using particular words to exclude them. It would seem to have been used merely because it followed out the line of division which the Constitution has drawn between the citizen race, who formed and held the government, and the African race, which they held in subject on and slavery, and governed at their own pleasure. Another of the early laws of which we have spoken is the first militia law, which was passed in 1792, at the first session of the Second Congress. The language of this law is equally plain and significant with the one just mentioned. It directs that every free able-bodied white male citizen shall be enrolled in the militia. The word white is evidently used to exclude the African race, and the word citizen to exclude unnaturalized foreigners, the latter forming no part of the sovereignty, owing it no allegiance, and therefore under no obligation to defend it. The African race, however, born in the country, did owe allegiance to the government, whether they were slaves or free, but it is repudiated and rejected from the duties and obligations of citizenship in marked language. The third act to which we have alluded is even still more decisive. It was passed as late as 1813, 2 Stat. 809, and it provides that from and after the termination of the war in which the United States are now engaged with Great Britain, it shall not be lawful to employ, on board of any public or private vessels of the United States, any person, or persons except citizens of the United States, or persons of color, natives of the United States. Here the line of distinction is drawn in express words. Persons of color, in the judgment of Congress, were not included in the word citizens, and they are described as another and different class of persons, and authorized to be employed if born in the United States, and even as late as 1820, Chapter 104, Section 8, in the Charter to the City of Washington, the corporation is authorized to restrain and prohibit the nightly and other disorderly meetings of slaves, free Negroes, and mulattoes, thus associating them together in its legislation, and after prescribing the punishment that may be inflicted on the slaves, proceeds in the following words, and to punish such free Negroes and mulattoes by penalties not exceeding $20 for any one offense, and in case of the inability of any such free Negro or mulatto to pay any such penalty and cost thereon, to cause him or her to be confined to labor for any time not exceeding 6 calendar mouths. And in a subsequent part of the same section, the Act authorizes the corporation to prescribe the terms and conditions upon which free Negroes and mulattoes may reside in the city. This law, like the laws of the states, shows that this class of persons were governed by special legislation directed expressly to them, and always connected with provisions for the government of slaves, and not with those for the government of free white citizens. And after such an uniform course of legislation, as we have stated, by the colonies, by the states, and by Congress, running through a period of more than a century, it would seem that to call persons thus marked and stigmatized citizens of the United States, fellow citizens, a constituent part of the sovereignty, would be an abuse of terms, and not calculated to exalt the character, or an American citizen, in the eyes of other nations. The conduct of the executive department of the government has been in perfect harmony upon this subject with this course of legislation. The quotation was brought officially before the late William Wirt, when he was the Attorney General of the United States, in 1821, and he decided that the words citizens of the United States were used in the acts of Congress, in the same sense as in the Constitution, and that free persons of color were not citizens, within the meaning of the Constitution and laws, and this opinion has been confirmed by that of the late Attorney General, Caleb Cushing, in a recent case, and acted upon by the Secretary of State, who refused to grant passports to them as citizens of the United States. But it is said that a person may be a citizen, and entitled to that character, although he does not possess all the rights which may belong to other citizens, as, for example, the right to vote, or to hold particular offices, and that yet, when he goes into another state, he is entitled to be recognized there as a citizen, although the state may measure his rights by the rights which it allows to persons of a like character or class resident in the state. and refuse to him the full rights of citizenship. This argument overlooks the language of the provision in the Constitution, of which we are speaking.